In this video we're going to take a look at some tools to discover files and directories on websites. So that might be referred to as directory busting or fuzzing or bruting, and we're going to use the Metasploitable 3 setup, which we've used in some previous videos and set up at the beginning of this series. So you can see that I've got an nmap scan results here for the two machines, which are the Metasploitable 3 Ubuntu VM and the Metasploitable 3 Windows Server. So they're both running. We have our nmap results back here, which you can check the previous video if you want to see some different options and stuff that we can use with nmap, some different scripts that we can run. And there are a few different tools that we're going to check out here. I'm just going to mention at the beginning, you might wonder why I don't cover wfuzz or ffuf in this. And the reason is I'm going to split this into a couple of videos. One focused on directory busting, one focused on brute forcing logins, and another just general fuzzing. So I will cover wfuzz and ffuf in more detail. These are tools which I use quite a lot. Well, I use wfuzz quite a lot and have started using ffuf more recently, as it seems to do the same sort of things but apparently faster. I've not actually tested out the speed of it, so when we get to the video on doing that, we'll try and run the same scans with wfuzz and ffuf to see exactly how much faster it is. But just thought I'd get that out of the way because some people might watch this video and wonder why it's not covered. So whenever I do a fuzzing video with these tools, I'll go through directory busting with those separately, as well as a lot of the other things that are associated with wfuzz. I want to stick this video to some tools which are specifically designed for directory busting, and while they might perform some other functions, that's really their sole purpose. So gobuster, which is the most common tool I would use out of this specific category, dirbuster, and which is the OWASP GUI version of directory brute forcer, and dirb, which is something I don't really use too much, but quite similar to the command line interface for gobuster. Before we get started with any of the tools, you'll want to make sure you have some word lists as well. I would recommend starting off with the sec lists, which you can download the Git repo, or if you're using Kali, you can actually just apt-get install it. So sudo apt-get install sec lists. Unfortunately, I'm on Parrot and it doesn't seem to be working at the moment, but I have a copy of this in the home directory, so we can have a look at what we have available. You can see we've got some different categories: discovery, fuzzing, indicators of compromise, passwords, payloads, and if we want to have a look into some of those in more detail, we could go and have a look and see. So for example, let's see what we have in the fuzzing category. You can see here we can fuzz for some XSS payloads. We can... oh, there's a lot of stuff in here to scroll through. It'll probably be easier to have a look at this here actually. Let's have a look. We've got discovery, so we can go through DNS, SNMP, file system, web content. Let's have a look at web content, as that's what we'll be interested in here. And you'll be able to find a lot of different categories depending on what you want to enumerate. So if you know you've got an Apache server, you might want to go and enumerate certain Apache directories and files. You have directory lists, so these are quite common to use. I think I normally use this one, directory lists lowercase 2.3. So in this case, the file is too big to view there, but we could go and let's do head-n 100 /seclists discovery web content and directory list 2.3 medium. So we can go and grab the top 100 from that list, but essentially it's going to go through and it's going to test each one of these whenever we're testing for directories. And if we want to add an extension onto these like .php or .html, we'll be able to do that as well. So let's go and take a look first of all at gobuster. If you don't have this installed already, you can probably install it with sudo apt-get. Otherwise, if you want to get the latest up-to-date version, you'll be able to do that from the GitHub. So you can see we have installation instructions here. It's written in Go, so you can use go install and then the GitHub address, or you can build it from source, or you should be able to do sudo apt-get as well, but you might not get as recent a version. We've got some examples of how to use it here, but let's just have a look at the different modes first of all. You can see here we have available modes. We have the directory mode, classic directory brute forcing, DNS, which is DNS subdomain brute forcing, S3 to enumerate open S3 buckets, and virtual host brute forcing. So we went through some DNS subdomain brute forcing tools in an earlier video, sublister, and a couple of others I can't recall at the moment, as well as some of the recon tools would also do some of the DNS subdomain brute forcing. I'm not going to cover that too much here because I'll probably cover that more in the wfuzz and ffuf where we do some more general fuzzing. Let's have a look here at more detail at the directory mode, which is the most common mode that I would use. So we can see based on this information that we can enter gobuster and then the mode being dir and then some different flags and global flags as well. So some of these will be required. For example, the target URL will need to specify, but things like the user agent won't necessarily be required. There is a default, but obviously gobuster is something that might be detected by web servers, so you might want to set that to a more realistic user agent like you would see in a typical browser. So if you want to get this information up from the terminal, let's actually just go back, and if we just run here gobuster, it'll give us the available commands. You can see here we have the different modes, and then if we want to get some more information on any of those specific commands, we can say gobuster help and then dir, and that'll give us all the directory commands, the flags that we can enter, and we can do the same then for DNS and vhost, etc. So we need to find a web server to test this out on. There are quite a few available. I've not actually tested this out yet, but if we go back to our nmap scan, we can see here, for example, we have the port 80 on the Ubuntu machine, which it's already detected some directories and files by default in the nmap scan that we use because we had it set to aggressive. So let's go and test that out. This is on 10.10.10.6. I'm going to take a copy of that. Let's go and have a look at it in the browser first of all. And you can actually see that we've got our directories here, so there's not really too much. We don't necessarily need to brute force this, but just to give this as an example of our first attempt, let's go back and see what we need to provide. I'm going to get that up again, the directory help. And let's start off with a couple of basic options. So let me just grab that URL again. So we're going to run gobuster. It's going to be the dir mode. And we're going to set a word list. I'm going to set the word list to the home directory, sec lists, discovery, web content, and then directory 2.3 medium. And we need to specify the URL, so that was -- we can just use -u, specify the URL, making sure that we have the / at the end of it, although there is an option somewhere to append that as well, add / to each request, so we can use flags to do some of this as well, specify cookies for example as well. If it's something we need to be logged into, then we can use cookies to do that. So that's that set up. We could also specify some files that we want to search for, so at the moment it's only going to search for directories, but if we use the -x flag, you can see here that we can search for extensions. So it'll essentially it'll try to get each directory that's in the list, and then it'll append the extension to each one of those words as well and try to request them as files. So something I would often do, depending on the web server, you might identify based on the operating system that's running, or be able to find out what web server's running, whether it's ASP or ASPX or PHP, and based on the type of server will depend what you're looking for here. But I normally run something like PHP, HTML, and maybe TXT. You could put in JavaScript and stuff. It depends how quick you want this to come back and how much information you want to retrieve. So if we run that, we can see that quite quickly it's come up here with uploads, it's come up with chat. Let's go back there. So we can see that chat was there. We didn't actually see uploads. Let's try and access uploads. Okay, so uploads is available, although it didn't show here, potentially because it's empty. We'll see if it comes up with the payroll app.php. I'm not too sure whether that'll be available in the word list. You can see it's found the Drupal folder. So while that's running, let's have a look at some of the other options we have available here. You can see we can hide length. So this is something that you'll see more commonly used with wfuzz and ffuf, is in order to determine whether a file or a directory exists, or if a username and password is correct, or a subdomain is available, you will look for the length of the response, and you'll hide any responses that come back which are the same length. So if you test for a directory and the directory isn't available and you get a response length which is say 88, then you know that any responses that are of 88, size 88, are likely to be invalid folders or files, and then you can just search for anything that doesn't come back with that length. Similarly, you can use that with other things. So for example, look for regex. Let's see what this has come back with. It's still not come back with the PHP file, but it has come back with all the folders that were available there. Another thing that's important to remember is gobuster is not recursive. So whenever it finds this directory of uploads and of chat, of PHP admin, etc., it's not actually dealing with those recursively. There was a recursive version available, but it's deprecated now. It's not maintained anymore. But you can use other tools to do a similar sort of thing, or you can essentially just say, right, well, we found this directory that looks interesting, let's go and run a separate scan on that. But depending on the size of the website you're dealing with, it could be quite cumbersome. Let's see what other options we have here. So we have the user agent. We can set a random user agent as well. We can check for specific status codes. We can provide a username and password for basic authentication. We can skip TLS, certificate verification. So quite often if you're working on a CTF or Hack the Box or something like that, you'll have an SSL site which doesn't actually have a valid SSL cert, in which case you'll need to use the -k flag to just allow it to actually run. So that's something which occurs quite a lot. Also, sometimes web servers are set up to not respond to these requests, in the sense that it'll just come back and say that everything is a valid page, in which case it'll quickly alert you here to say that there's a lot of false positives and to cancel the scan, in which case you would need to then focus on something else, like for example the length of the body, a variety of different other options. One thing I would say as well is you might want to set up an alias for a default scan here. So you can see that this is kind of a default scan that I run. Let me just go here and grep gobuster from my bash aliases. So I have this set up, this gobusters alias, to essentially just mean that we can just pass in the URL. So instead of entering in that full command that we just did there with the directory and the word list, if I was trying to get like first blood on a Hack the Box machine, which is never going to happen, then I would try to minimize the time in terms of typing out, looking for word lists and things like that, and just have this set to taking a URL and then perhaps maybe X PHP, something like that. We could actually go ahead, let me go and set this to Drupal just to show that it's not recursive. So if we now set this to the same parameters as the last example, we've quickly got index.php back, we've got MISC, we've got themes, modules, scripts. Again, each one of these folders are folders you would then want to do some directory busting on again. You can see that these have come back with various codes as well, so some of these aren't going to be available for us to browse to. Let's go back here. I'm going to cancel that scan for now. It probably would pick up that other PHP file, but it might take a while to find it. If you're dealing with a web server which has a firewall or an intrusion detection system in place, you might want to limit the number of threads as well, and potentially add a delay between the requests to avoid detection. Similarly, I've already mentioned this, but changing the user agent or setting the user agent to random might help. You can also pass your traffic through a proxy as well, something worth bearing in mind. And I think that's the main kind of options covered for the HTTP brute forcing. Let's go and take a look at another tool. You can see that our second gobuster scan has come back with quite a lot of different files available. But yeah, let's cancel that. We'll take a look at dirbuster, which is the OWASP graphical user interface package. So I'm going to test dirbuster out on the same site just so we can compare them properly. Take a copy of that and let's go and open up the interface. We can paste that URL in. You probably don't need to specify port 80, but we'll do that anyway. But do make sure you have the / at the end. We can have this switch between head and get requests. We can increase the speed here as well, the number of threads are available. Depending whether you're using this against a local server, which we are in our case, and a web server, will depend probably on what you want to select here. We can do list-based brute force or pure brute force. So pure brute force is just going to be literally brute force in all the characters in the alphabet. So we're going to do a list-based brute force, and again we're just going to go and grab the same. Let's go sec lists, discovery, web content, and we can grab the directory list 2.3 medium. We have the be recursive option ticked here, which is good. So we've got brute force directories, brute force files. We can also brute force file extensions as well. So we could insert HTML and TXT like we did last time. You can also use the blank extension, not going to bother with that. And you can see you can specify the URL to fuzz here. We'll leave that as well. Let's just go start and see what happens here. This is quite a nice view in terms of the interface, because we can go and we can see the results here as a list, or we can go and see them as a tree, and we can go and expand them. So if you're dealing with a big site, I mean, even this site here, it's got quite a lot of folders and files, which if we were using gobuster and testing all of these manually, it wouldn't necessarily be very efficient. You can see it picked up the payroll app.php very quickly there as well. Having said that, we're running this with a lot of threads. We just had the gobuster set to the default, which was 10, and this is set to 500, so that's worth bearing in mind. We also have, we can see our time to finish here, which wasn't available on gobuster. I didn't see any estimates there, although you might be able to print them out as well. But I mean, that's essentially it. There's not really too much more to this that wasn't available in our last tool. There wasn't anything in terms of inserting cookies and stuff there, but I'm sure there's some more flexible options which I'm not too aware of. I very rarely use this tool, to be honest. And let's go and take a look at another tool which I very rarely use, which is dirb. So let me open up the help menu here, which apparently there isn't one. So we can open up the manual, but this has very similar options to gobuster. You can see here we can specify our user agent, we can specify our headers, we can specify cookies or proxy, username and password for basic auth, our extensions. A lot of the options are available on gobuster. I'm assuming this isn't going to be anywhere near as fast as gobuster, but it'd be interesting to compare as well. But I'm going to close that manual down. Let's go and open up the website with some of this information. So something to note here is you can provide the -r flag, lowercase r, to prevent it searching recursively. So this tool actually combines the recursive element of dirbuster and the command line element of gobuster, which is pretty handy. You can see some different examples of how to use it here. This is how we need to specify our options. So we run dirb or URL or word list, and then any of these options that we want to provide. You can see some examples here. So we'll go and test it out with the same site that we've run the other two tools on. Let's go and run dirb, and we want to provide the URL, and then we want to provide the word list. So I'm going to pass in sec lists, discovery, web content, directory 2.3 medium, and then we could provide, if we wanted to set our user agent, we could use -a. If we want to set a cookie, for example, specify a PHP session ID or something like that. If we wanted to set a header, so we might want to set the x_for header to bypass some kind of IP check, or if we want to do a case-insensitive search of these directories and files, etc. Print location. There's a lot of different options there. Let's just try and run the default scan. So I left that running for about 5 minutes, and it stayed on this generating word list message the whole time. While it was running, I had a look at a GitHub issue where somebody was running dirb against the same word list and explained that the same issue was happening. Didn't really seem to get a resolution to it, so I'm not going to waste too much time on it. If we try and run it without a word list, it'll compile, I guess, this default word list it's using from the dirb folder, and it quickly starts finding the directories, the Drupal, chat, PHP, myadmin, uploads. We start to get some of these error messages, these warning messages, which are just saying the directory is listable, there's no need to scan it. So let's go and open that up. And this is exactly what we had seen anyway, that we're able to just go and browse through some of these directories. We don't necessarily need to brute force them. So let's go back here. If we did want to brute force them, we could pass in the -w flag and go ahead with that anyway. We can see it found 15 that were home directories that weren't directly listable. I think that'll do it for this video. In a future video, we're going to go through wfuzz and ffuf and how we can use those for fuzzing a lot of different parameters, including usernames and passwords. And we'll do a more specific video on brute forcing credentials, not just for HTTP, but for FTP and SSH and the various different services available. But I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Thanks.